Welcome back to the Hoard Dairyman podcast. Today we're back with a familiar guest to us, Marilyn Hershey. She is our recently retired former columnist for our Common Threads column, and she's moving on to new ventures, but we miss her, so we wanted to just ask her to come on and kind of share her life story and what she's done over the past few years and where she's headed. So, Marilyn, I just want to start off with a kind of a powerful question here. If you had 60 seconds to tell the world what they don't understand about dairy farm families, what answer would you give them?
Wow, that's a tough one because there's so many things I'd like to say, but I think the bottom line is that farmers care, and farmers care about the animals, they care about the land, and this is a lifestyle for us, and so maybe people don't understand practices and understand, outside people don't understand what we do, but the bottom line is we care.
For sure, and you've been at this dairying thing for a while now. Let's get into it here. How did you get involved in the dairy industry? I mean, I know you grew up on a dairy farm, but how did that kind of evolve into where you are today?
My mother used to, both my parents have passed recently in the last couple years, but my mother used to tell me that I would tell her as a middle school, high school kid that I was going to marry a dairy farmer. And there's no question, I loved the dairy farm. Um, I gave her a hard time because anytime she would give me a list of chores to do in the house, I would instantly go to my dad and say, "What do you have to do in the barn?" And because I knew the barn would trump the house, and so I rather would have been in the barn doing chores with him. So I did have chores in the house, but there were a lot of times I got out of them just so I could go to the barn and be out there. So I married Dwayne. His family farmed about 10 hours or 10 miles. They farmed about 10 miles south of us where I grew up. And so it wasn't moving far, but it was moving a little distance, and was able to farm with him on his family farm.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Dwayne was about 10 miles south of you. Um, did you guys know each other growing up, or how did you guys kind of fall in love?
So he was a good friend of my brother's, and he was 3 years older than me, and we just kind of eventually noticed each other. There were things we did together with church programs and locally with things going on with Holstein Club, but finally recognized each other. I was out of school about a year and involved in the Dairy Princess program and as a county princess. And he says that I purposely asked, his father was in the state house, so he was a state representative. So really a figure, local prominent figure. And so I asked him to MC the Dairy Princess program, in which I was handing over the crown to the next Chester County princess. And so, Dwayne thinks that I asked his father just so he would come to the Dairy Princess program, but we knew each other well, and once we started dating, it wasn't too long till we realized it was a perfect fit.
Aw, sounds like the classic small town love story. So I'm assuming, life moved on and you guys had gotten married. How did you make that decision that you were going to farm on Dwayne's parents' farm and, with young children and stuff? How did that process kind of look like for you guys?
We started. I think it just was a very natural fit. He was on his father's farm, as I mentioned. His dad was in the state house in Harrisburg, and so Even though his parents were involved in the farm, they were not involved in the day to day. And so, when Dwayne and I got married, we started what's called a growing partnership. Um, I had 13 cows when we got married. So, I used to always to tease him that I came with the dowry of cows. And so it added a little bit, but we didn't have the equity. And so by starting a growing partnership, it was a natural way for Dwayne and I to build some equity. 50% of any calf that was born after our partnership was automatically into the partnership. And then, so after 5 years, Dwayne and I had enough equity built up in cows and machinery that we could purchase the cows and machinery from his father and mother, and then rent from them. So we had that partnership, which really helped Dwayne and I get started. And it was we moved to the farmhouse after 5-6 years, and his parents moved off of the house or off of the farm, and moved into another house that they built on the farm, which actually Dwayne and I are in that house now. So um, our daughter and her two children are in the farmhouse right now. But we had 4 children, raised them on the farm, and it was a great place to raise a family.
It's funny how life comes for full circle like that. Being a young mom and, acquiring the farm and trying to grow, how did you manage that? That's kind of a lot with 4 little ones in tow. Was there ever a time that you thought this is too much, or this is a lot, or how did you manage those things?
It is a lot to manage, and each farm family has their own way to manage it. There's really not I would say, a solution that is cookie cutter that works for everybody. Every farm family has their own way to deal with it. But for Dwayne and I, it was, we didn't live for several years. We didn't live on the farm, and so our children were young, and it was difficult to have them have 4 little ones under tow in an environment where it's farm safety is front and center. And so we hired a babysitter to stay with them when we were off location at another house. And so the babysitter would stay with them, and I would be responsible for the evening milking. Now, as the kids got older, they would help with chores. We didn't need the babysitter. We were living on the farm. It was much easier to be back and forth between the house and the barn. And so they would help with chores as they got older. But when they were really small, we had a babysitter that would come and stay with them during milking.
And it certainly is nice once they reach that age of kind of self-sufficiency that they can do some things on their own, and the extra chore help, I'm sure, was much appreciated. During those first few years when you had young children, what other kind of challenges did your family run into regarding the farm and building up the farm?
Yeah, I think there's always challenges that you run into when you're farming. It's it's the nature of farming. We had one challenge we faced when the children were younger is our son Robert had leukemia when he was 5. So he's our third child. He was our third son, and so that was difficult. That was a difficult time. It was, and Dwayne had the farm to run, and so I was in the hospital with Robert, and he would be at home running the farm. I know one time, it was that time when bills had to be paid, and the milk check had been deposited, and so he just took the drawer out of the roll top desk, and he just brought the whole drawer into the hospital. that's because he knew everything was in there. deposit information I needed, the checkbook I needed, the bills that were there. So he just brought the whole drawer into the hospital, and I took care of the bills that way. But you kind of have to figure out how you're going to face each day, and each day you face new challenges, and you just do that. You do the best you can with what you're given, and so that was a challenge. Certainly, that was one of the bigger challenges we faced.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of is a lot because farming is 365 days a year, 24/7. It doesn't stop. So having a child in the hospital, I'm sure, was not what you had wanted to be doing at that time. When it comes to being a farm wife, there's no cookie cutter, I guess, box that farm wives fit into, but that has certainly, the perspective on farm wives have certainly changed over the years. How has that looked for you from the time you had began farming to now?
It is interesting, how that does kind of evolve and change, and I think farm women today are more respected. There's more of a expectancy, or an anticipation that a farm wife is not just there in the house, but some farm wives are very active in the day to day. They're very active in decisions, and very much a part of the decision making process. And so I do feel like there's a greater respect for what farm women bring to the farm. And you know what? Like I said before, every farm is different. There's some farm wives that they work off the farm, and they make it possible. It's another income that really helps the farm. And so I know I have a lot of friends that one of them worked in a bank for a while. One of them is a nurse, and worked at a hospital as a nurse. She was also really good at helping to take care of calves. But it works. Every farm's um, makeup and the way they do things is different. And but I do think there's a greater respect for farm women now than there was years ago.
For sure, and we certainly are valuing the opinion of farm women. I mean, that's kind of why we brought you in to be a columnist for us and kind of give farm women and, I guess, empowering people all across the board a voice. So that brings me to my next kind of topic, the common threads that you've been writing for us for, gosh, how many years has it been? I'm not even sure.
Close to 20, not quite.
20 years. So that's a very impressive tenure that you've been writing for us. And when I read your last column, like we were discussing before we had started recording, it was a little bit sad for me to read your last column. I've been editing Marilyn's columns for 2 years now. But how did you even get involved in writing for us? Give our listeners a little bit of that background.
Sure. Children's writing, creative writing was something I always enjoyed. And I just started being involved in more writers groups. I started attending Christian writers conferences, and that's really what got my interest started in writing. I had a picture book that I published when Robert had cancer, and it's called Oncology Stupology. I Want to Go Home. And I self-published that book back in a time period where self-publishing was not widely accepted. But I had been attending a lot of conferences prior to that, kind of honing in my writing skills, learning a lot about writing, and trying to figure out where I fit in the writing world. I actually had a column on a Christian online site called crosswalk.com. And I had a column, it was a 300-word column. It was weekly, and it had to cover farm, faith, and family. And so, and she also, the editor that I worked with, also wanted some humor involved. But I met her at a writers' conference, so it really was kind of stepping into it. Um, and so I knew I always had an interest in writing, and I really had a burning desire to tell my farm story when the Crosswalk column termed out, and they went another direction. I think it was 5 years I wrote for them, three or four maybe. That it was quite a while that I wrote for them. But when that termed out, I knew I still had a lot I wanted to say to farm families. So just had an interest in getting my story out there.
For sure. So, from what I have gathered, it was Corey Geiger and Steve Larson who have kind of reeled you in and asked you to be a part of our team here. What were your first thoughts when they had accepted your article for the first time? What were you thinking at that point?
When I first approached Hoards, I was like I said, I was really trying to get my story out there and have someone accept a column. And I met Josh Hushin, which I knew him from Pennsylvania Holstein things, but I had met him at the All American Dairy Show, and I was doing some correspondence for the show, and saw him, and I knew he worked for Hoards, and so we were chatting in the hallway, and I said, look, I said I would love to write a column and I'm looking for a place to land it. I said, is Hoards interested? And he said, actually, we are, because we're looking for a columnist right now. And so it was perfect timing. And he took the articles to Corey and Steve, and when they said yes, I was thrilled. Like I was blown away with a lot of honor and a tremendous amount of respect for the magazine as a whole, and I was shocked and thrilled at the same time, but very excited, and have never forgotten where the opportunity that they all gave me.
Yeah, it sounds like the stars aligned kind of in that scenario. As your column had gained popularity over the years, um, did you get any reader feedback that kind of hit you? Or in your latest columns, you had mentioned that you made a lot of new friends because of your column. How did that make you feel?
It's very humbling, and it was really, I'd meet different people, and they'd be like, "Oh, wait, you're Marilyn Hershey. I read your article," and it would kind of set me back. I'd be shocked. I'd be like, really? Well, that's great. It just was very humbling, and not something that I was prepared for. It but it was a wonderful opportunity to meet so many amazing people. And there were times I would write an article and I would feel like I sent this off, and boy, I'm not sure that this resonated with anybody. And then someone would come up and say, hey, I read this article, and man, that really touched me, and it really helped me through. And so um, those are the responses that were just incredibly meaningful, and hard to describe. I think one that always stands out is someone from WD's family contacted me and sent me a beautifully handwritten note of thanking me for the articles that I've written in the magazine, and it meant a lot to them. So that was very meaningful to me, and it just, yeah, people, you don't realize when you're encouraging someone, you're sending a note like that, how much it means to people. So I try to remember that.
Definitely. And being in print media, the feedback can be a little more difficult to track people's perceptions of what you're writing. So, any compliments that are given certainly help you, at least for me, encourage me to write more or do better at my writing. So, I'm sure you felt the same way when it came to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very helpful.
So, how did you come up with your story ideas for the columns?
Oh, I used to tease Dwayne because he would know when I'm working on an article, and he'd be on his best behavior, and if he knew if he didn't behave himself, he was going to end up in an article. But we always joked about that. But he was also a big part of the articles because he would proofread everything and give me a lot of input. On my writing. But when you're working out in the farm, I mean, things happen, and it just seemed like uh, things would happen on the farm, and I just kept a mental recording all the time. Oh, that'd be a great article. And so I would either jot it down on paper or recently put it in my notes in my phone. And so I had a list of articles. When it came time for an article due, I knew that I would go to that oftentimes and find something that would fit for that time period. Or sometimes, things would happen and it would be a seasonal, and I already was done with that season. So I would make note of it for the next year. I just, things happen on the farm every day. It's not hard to come up with articles.
For sure. And kind of like farming, the magazine deadline doesn't stop. So, regardless, the column has to be submitted, whether rain, shine, snow, whatever. Were there any times that you ran into, any obstacles in trying to get your article in on time? But
Well, you probably know that better than I do because I was always like, hey, when's my article due? What's the last day that I can send this in? But yeah, writer's block is a real thing. And for those that write, there are times that you're working on an article and it does not flow at all, and you need to do something to get that writer's flow going again. And for me, it was working. So if I would get stuck going out and working on the farm, or giving it time, maybe I'm working outside for a little bit, just any kind of that physical work just really helps to get it flowing again. And you know what? There were some times I was working on an article and I had to put it aside and go another direction. Um, maybe it didn't have a right feel for the right time. And so it's also I had to learn how to listen to the article itself, and kind of let the article take on its own go its own path. And sometimes that meant letting go of one I was working on and go another direction that I wasn't even expecting.
for sure. And as I know it wasn't an easy decision to kind of put the pencil down per se, not that you are actually, but what kind of led you to pass the torch, I guess, to we actually have three other people writing the column now, but what kind of led you to that decision?
It was really a tough decision, and it's one that I rolled around for quite a while um, before I was willing to say, you know what, this is going to be my last year. And then even after I told you guys, I struggled with the decision, um, because I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed that connection with readers, and I didn't want to disappoint people, but I just knew it was time, and I felt like, you know what, it has been almost 20 years, and the world is changing at such a fast pace. And I think the readers deserve to hear from from the younger generation. And I felt like that's what it's time. It's time to hear from some other people, and bring a fresh perspective. I felt like there were times I would work on an article, and in my head I'm thinking, I think I did this before. I think I covered this topic before. And even though it was different examples and different things, I did not want to be circular. in my articles. So I just felt like it's time, as hard as it was.
Yes, and we were certainly sad to see you go, but I'm sure, I mean, 20 years of writing, it's hard to come up with new topics that, like you said, you're not beating the drum again all over. But really appreciated your work with us. And now that you've kind of, I guess, per se, retirement, what's Marilyn up to now?
Well, I have the role as chair of DMI, and so that keeps me busy and focused. I recently was able to be elected to a position internationally on an international board for International Dairy Federation, and so I want to make sure I have the time for that, and the commitment that that brings, and being able to be a U.S. farmer voice, and make sure that U.S. farmers are being defined properly, as opposed to someone else trying to define us. And really, how can we help dairy across the globe? How can we help dairy have the strength that it needs? So I'm excited about that, and to represent farmers in that way. But I also have some other writing I want to do. I mentioned being involved, writing a picture book. I used to be very involved in children's writers organizations, and I have a couple middle grade novels that I started, never finished, and so I'd like to finish a couple of those. I'd like to work on a devotional that I've been thinking about, and maybe I will clean up the articles I had in Hoards and put them in a book. So there's a lot of things I think I'd like to continue. I'll definitely continue writing.
Well, that's great to hear, and it sounds like you're definitely still keeping busy. Are you still actively involved on the farm, as I'm sure you are, but to what degree, I'm unsure.
Yes, I am at a lesser day to day. I'm not feeding calves every day anymore, but very involved in the book work and the computer work that is on the farm. So still involved. It's still Dwayne and I really as the sole proprietors of the farm, and so we're still both very much involved in the decision making process, of what happens on the farm. So I'm still active, but not quite at the level that I was in the day to day. Which with everything else, that was time too. So uh, there's seasons you come to in life, and I don't like to think of myself as getting older, but that's the reality of what it is. So we work with it.
For sure, and I mean, you're still keeping busy as far as it goes in regard to the next 10 years for you and Dwayne and your operation. I know you had mentioned in one of your articles that your daughter had recently come back. Do you guys what's your next 10 years looking like, 5 years plan?
Not quite sure. We do have a creamery that's happening. Our daughter is here part time with the farm. She also is a school teacher, and so she focuses there. And she has a young family as well, so that keeps her busy. But we do have a creamery that we are making and selling ice cream. We sell at wholesale, not at retail, but that's been a new venture for us, and it's gone really well. We're excited about the upcoming year.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one as we reach the tail end of 2025. As we kind of wind down here, what advice would you give to young farmers? I mean, you were in that position how many years ago, and certainly is a different era of farming, I should say. But what advice would you give to young farmers that are looking to get into farming?
Whether you grow up on a farm or not, there are opportunities out there, and just keep your eyes and your ears open for those opportunities. Um, you have to be willing to take risk, but get advice in that. We leaned into a lot of people, whether they were people from our church, people, professional people who were consulting. We were involved in the Holstein organizations. And so, you get involved and you meet other farmers, you hear how other farmers are doing it. I would say don't remain in a silo. Find your community, whoever that is, whether it's around you. I think these days you can have a community that's much broader than we ever expected, right? I mean, it's so much easier to keep in contact with people. But find your community and lean into them, and just know that you're not alone in making some of those decisions.
For sure, and certainly some good advice from someone who has seen it all and has been a great advocate for the dairy industry. Marilyn, I want to ask you, I know you have little grandchildren at home. If they listen to this episode someday, what would you want them to know about your life?
Wow. Well, not everything was perfect, right? But you keep trying, you keep getting up. After you fall down, you get up and try again. We had some tough years, and not everything was easy, and not everything in life is fair. You can't expect that, right? But you keep going and you keep doing your best. And I think farm life teaches you how to be resilient, and that's a wonderful thing. But you can't give up. You just have to keep trying.
Yes, and that's great advice. I got goosebumps after hearing you say that. Certainly great advice from truly a Hoard's legacy. We are so grateful to have you on today, Marilyn, and thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
the
you.
past 20 plus years. It's been a joy, and you're always welcome to write for us
Oh,
anytime.
well, thank you, Jenna. It's been wonderful. It's been an honor, and really, the readers out there, love you guys so much, and thank you so much for the support that I've always had. But the Hordes team has just been amazing, and it's been a joy. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Hoard's Dairyman podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. See you next time.